Many chapters in the Adeptus Astartes are marred or defined by their genetics in some way or another. Whether it's due to a quirk of mutation or a characteristic trait, very few chapters have a history and features that cannot be traced back through their heritage in some way. However, for the descendants of one Primarch in particular, their genetics are truly a curse that has haunted them since his death, and one chapter is especially marked by it in a way that has shaped their entire culture. Whilst we have addressed them in a log long ago, I wish to update their tale and study how they have adapted into this new era. They are of the line of Sanguinius, first led by Nasir Amit and now kept fighting by Chapter Master Gabriel Seth. They are the Flesh Tearers. This is Tactica Imperialis, and welcome to 40k Stories. The Flesh Tearers have been around for over 11,000 years at this point, having been one of the chapters created during the second founding. The first founding chapters were the ones to keep the names of their parent legion, though they were created at the same time. As mentioned, they hail from the gene line of the Primarch Sanguinius and the 9th Legion, the Blood Angels. The first chapter master of the Tearers was an individual named Nasir Amit, captain of the Blood Angels' 5th Company during the Great Crusade in Horus Heresy, and the one to give his chapter its name. Amit's epithet was the Flesh Tearer, after all. During their early history, the Flesh Tearers were a crusading chapter, with Amit leading them in assault after assault against the retreating traitor legions in the Great Scouring. However, even then there was a darkness at the heart of the Flesh Tearers that has defined them perhaps more than any surviving Blood Angel's successor. All of the descendants of Sanguinius are marked by their Primarch and his genetics through a collective condition known as the Flaw. It manifests in two ways, the Red Thirst and the Black Rage. The former is typically temporary and dates back to the Great Crusade, whilst the latter is almost always permanent and is linked to the Angel's death at the hands of Horus Lupercal. In their early days, the Flesh Tearers under Amit would willingly give themselves over to their rage and anger, venting it on every battlefield they walked and leaving naught but annihilation in their wake. The Red Thirst came to define the Flesh Tearers in the era of Nasir Amit, with the chapter's gene seed seemingly much more susceptible to the Flaw than other Sons of Sanguinius, and the Black Rage, as it would come to be known, has haunted them more and more with time. During his leadership, the still crusading Amit became obsessed with the death world Cretacia, segmentum unknown, but presumably Imperium Nihilis. Its original name is lost. This one was given by the chapter to mean Birth of Wrath in one of Baal's ancient languages. Whilst it appeared utterly uninhabitable at first, a hardy if backwards colony of humans had survived there, and Amit saw the world as the physical representation of his chapter's nature that, if tamed and taken, could help to temper the Tearers in turn. And so the Flesh Tearers landed on Cretacia to claim it for their own. The colonists were found to be pure, able recruits, the world was tamed just enough, and Amit declared a right of conquest that allowed his crusading chapter to take Cretacia as home. Amit's fate is unknown, as he disappeared aboard a ship from Cretacia's system and never returned, but the Flesh Tearers have fought on without him ever since, even as their situation became more and more dire. The Black Rage became more and more of a problem within the chapter's ranks, meaning the Flesh Tearers probably have the largest death company in the entirety of the former 9th Legion. This is for two primary and unique reasons that could have easily seen the Flesh Tearers wiped from history and existence by now by the Blood Angels or the wider Imperium. The first is the fact that, unlike other 9th Legion successors who typically succumb during the pre-battle prayers and preparations designed specifically to catch them, the Flesh Tearers can go at any time. They may not be noticed right away, more on why in a minute, but they can slip regardless, and once they're gone, they can never be brought back. The second is that the Flesh Tearers don't execute those in their death company who survive a given battle. Typically, the Reclusium or High Chaplain Astarath himself will kill them once the war is won, but the leaders of the Tearers don't, instead securing them between battles and keeping them alive to fight again. Given the hallucinatory hell that the Death Company are believed to be trapped in, witnessing the final moments of Sanguinius and fighting near to or as him, this might sound simply like torture, but it may be the only way that the Tearers can maintain anything like a solid operating strength whilst on campaign. This insistence on the Death Company's survival has put them at loggerheads with their fellow Ninth Legion descendants, with even Asterath being defied in the moment to prevent him from doing his duty. But somehow the Flesh Tearers have survived and been allowed to stay within the ranks of the Sons of Sanguinius, whilst others have been cast out seemingly for less. Interestingly, however, when the matter of the Flesh Tearers is brought before the Carmine Council of Chapter Masters, it's Asterath himself who often speaks in defense of the chapter, refusing to let them be cast out or executed. That said, it is not only the Scions of Baal that the Flesh Tearers must fear when it comes to their existence and place within the Imperium. Members of the Inquisition see them as tainted. Some would even use them as a means to condemn the entire Ninth Legion for corrupted genetics if they had the chance. This is in part due to the actions of the Flesh Tearers when on campaign. While civilian losses are almost expected when Space Marines are called in to fight an invasion, the Flesh Tearers leave an outrageous body count in their wake everywhere they go. Even their allies in combat are not safe when the thirst and the rage hold sway over the Flesh Tearers, and the supposed end of a battle can pass the Tearers by without note, as they do not even realise their enemies are dead and only their allies are left standing. This has driven the chapter to fight alone as far as possible, throwing itself against near impossible odds by working solo rather than risk massacring other Imperial forces, though there are several known cases of mass exterminatus being used to try and throw away and hide what the Tearers have done. But even if there are those within the Inquisition who have stayed the hand of execution over the Sons of Cretacia, there is public animosity between the two groups that in turn reflects poorly on the other Sons of Sanguinius. For the Blood Angels and the others descended from their line, the Flesh Tearers are the black sheep of the family, a dark reflection of the nobility of Sanguinius and a shadow of what they all could become because of the flaw. It was predicted before the era Indomitus that the chapter was headed for extinction anyway. Even the most optimistic of the sanguinary priesthood gave dire estimates of how long the Tearers had before the flaw or their foes wiped them out. Some choose to embrace this, whilst others cling to a hope of survival, and even the coming of the Primaris Space Marines, divisive anyway amongst the chapter, has not proved to be some sort of miracle cure to sustain Nasir Amet's descendants. Whilst many thought, perhaps even hoped, that the curse of genetics might not affect the Primaris due to the tinkering of Archmagos' call, both the lines of the Blood Angels and the Space Wolves in particular have proven this to be broadly false. Rather like the Ninth Legion itself, the slip of the Primaris Blood Angels was not instant. The Red Thirst manifested first in isolated cases, but as time has passed, even Cole's creations have proved susceptible to the Black Rage. And so the Death Company of the Flesh Tearers has gained a new breed of members on a regular basis, a new set of damned in their equivalent to the Tower of Amareo, fighting on and on in hell. Whilst much of the chapter's history between the days of Amet and the modern era has been lost, much is known and speculated about their current leadership. The Chapter Master of the Flesh Tearers today is an individual known as Gabriel Seth, seen by some as the Tearers' last hope for survival and or sanity in this dark age. Seth's life and career before his ascension to Chapter Master is unknown, but he took office in the year 815 M41. At the time, only some 3 companies of the Flesh Tearers were remaining in the chapter's ranks, not accounting for the Death Company, whose numbers vary wildly, and the Imperium was about 1 massacre away from casting them out entirely. Worse still, the sanguinary priesthood passed on the aforementioned extinction warning, stating that the attrition of war and the Death Company would consign the chapter to the history books before long. However, Seth would not accept this as the Flesh Tearers' fate, resolving that the chapter would survive the years to come. Glory may be something that the Flesh Tearers could never earn again due to their genetics and reputation, but they would not die under his watch, and if they did, then at least they would go out with honour. Seth turned Cretacia over wholly to the recruitment and equipping of new Flesh Tearers to try and boost or maintain the chapter numbers. This seems to have worked somewhat. The Tearers remain under strength even with Primaris reinforcement, we believe, but they certainly managed to outlast the prediction of decades given by the priesthood on Seth's ascension. To restore their honour somewhat, the Flesh Tearers have been led by Seth on numerous campaigns to protect the Imperium, always fighting alone where possible, as previously mentioned. This has definitely helped with the chapter's reputation, but Seth has proven to be a rather poor diplomat when forced to ally with other forces, often seen as impetuous or even ignorant depending on the allies around him. When asked why he was so confrontational by Chapter Master Dante of the Blood Angels, Seth merely responded that it was the way of the Flesh Tearers to always be on edge, unpredictable and seeking conflict, but it is no surprise why this is such a problem for many other commanders. In recent times, Gabriel Seth and the Flesh Tearers have found themselves embroiled in their parent chapter's affairs on more than a few occasions. The machinations of chaos in the Archeo insurrection had crippled the Blood Angels, with Commander Dante doing as the Imperial Fists once did and calling upon the Blood Angels' successors to provide reinforcement via a tithe of warriors. Seth was invited by Sergeant Rayfin, but refused, stating that the Flesh Tearers would too diminish themselves around 4 companies to provide for their parent chapter. Yet after the incident involving the stolen blood of Sanguinius and Fabius Bile, Seth would shock Dante by fighting at his side to protect the Primarch's sarcophagus and then pledging the Flesh Tearers' warrior contribution after all. Seth then proved instrumental in hunting down the clone of Bile that held the Primarch's blood, providing Dante with key intel, albeit seemingly by stumbling onto it. Years, perhaps decades later, in the period just before the outbreak of the Cicatrix Maledictum, the Tearers committed much of their strength under Seth's command to the defence of the Cryptus system, helping to protect Baal itself from the oncoming Tyranid Hive Fleet Leviathan. The Tearers fought on the planet Lysios, with the Black Rage flaring stronger than ever, but with Seth's leadership they emerged victorious even as the wider system fell. Seth was then of course part of the great reunion of the Ninth Legion on Baal, as Dante recalled every Blood Angel and successor to the planet's defence against Leviathan. In particular, Seth and the Flesh Tearers were deployed to the moon of Baal Primus, where they would be fighting alongside the exiled Knights of Blood who had returned without invitation. The first blade of the Knights, Centaur Jewel, saw in Seth what many in and outside the Flesh Tearers do: hope of surviving the flaw, of not letting the Black Rage or the Red Thirst damn the chapter as it had the blood-drinking Knights. Seth was initially adamant in his refusal to fight with Jewel, citing their habits of killing humans in order to feed and trading them as naught but cattle. But when it became clear that the Tyranids could not be held back on Baal Primus, Seth softened enough to suggest withdrawing to Baal and fighting alongside the Knights in the process. As it happened, the Knights of Blood would never leave the moon, as it was around that moment that the Great Rift opened and the legions of Khorne led by Kabanda, the arch-enemy of Sanguinius and his sons, manifested on Baal Primus. The Red Thirst and the Black Rage claimed the entire chapter of Knights of Blood at that moment, but Jewel maintained just enough of his sanity to instruct the Tearers to evacuate. The Knights could no longer hide their nature and would meet their death with honour at Kabanda's hands rather than be damned and hunted down. This battle alongside the Knights showed what Seth perhaps already knew. The Flesh Tearers could easily have been the Knights of Blood, but they were held together perhaps solely by the will of their Chapter Master, and Jewel had wished to fight alongside the Tearers precisely because he knew that Seth would understand his plight better than any other. When the Flesh Tearers returned to Baal, they joined the final sally from the Arx Angelicum, but it was Seth who took overall command of the Pseudo-Legion in the aftermath of Dante's crippling at the hands of the Swarm Lord. He managed to hold the planet and the Fortress Monastery long enough for the Indomitus Crusade under Robert Guilliman to arrive, at which point Seth clashed with the Blood Angels once again on a matter of principle. It is no secret that Gabriel Seth loathes the Primaris Marines in every sense. He's accepted them into the chapter where they have won many plaudits with the Firstborn, but he doesn't have to like it. Seth saw the Primaris, especially the Awoken of the Indomitus Crusade, as not being true Flesh Tearers due to their improved, supposedly flaw-free genetics. In fact, he called them an insult to the suffering of the Tearers, openly criticising Khorne and Guilliman in front of Dante and insisting that his chapter would never accept them. But they did, no matter how much he hated it, and many within the Tearers have come to rather like the Primaris for their prowess in battle, though the fact that they are susceptible to the flaw may have changed relations for better or worse depending on who you ask. Seth's fears of the Primaris turning all chapters into essentially Ultramarines with a different paint job appears to be unfounded, and he has continued to lead the Flesh Tearers from the front with the same cold fury. Following the resolution of the conflict on Baal, the newly honoured regent of Imperium Nihilus Dante set out to reclaim his home system and then the wider Red Scar region from the Tyranids. The Flesh Tearers were called upon to attack and take back one of 3 nearby systems termed the Points of Grace, with the world of Ashalon being the source of their heaviest fighting. The shadow in the warp and other psychic disturbances, very common in this new era, caused the Black Rage to flare even more than usual, splintering the lines of the Terrors, but with a little help from the Imperial Navy, Seth killed the Psycho Beast causing most of the trouble and seemingly securing Ashalon. And there you have it, the updated tale of Gabriel Seth and the Flesh Tearers. Whilst the chapter may have dragged itself back from the edge of extinction under the stewardship of his current master, the Flesh Tearers remain a source of controversy amongst the Blood Angels and the Imperium as a whole for their violent tendencies and somewhat dark practices. Some say that only with the leadership of Seth will the chapter survive due to his skill and actually his temperament. But whatever awaits for the Scions of Cretacia, I am sure that it will be drenched in blood and lost in rage. For now, however, we must move on. Our next tale, I believe, will take us back into the Immaterium for a time. We've discussed many, if not all, of the inhabitants of the warp at some time or another, but it's been a very long time since we actually looked at the big guns, and even when we did, I admit it was rather lacking in detail. So that's what I feel like we're going to do, explore the most powerful denizens of the realm of chaos. Thank you very much for watching Tactica Imperialis, and I'll see you all again. Goodbye.